Yeah. All right. So Prudential. It's good for you to avoid being hit by the bus or or not ingesting salmonella, right?
Right. Yeah.
But these are not, generally speaking, moral goods. These types of things are prudential. They're not good in and of themselves, right? He wants to say that moral goods are, at least allegedly, good, period. Right? Those things. And so telling the truth, for instance, he says, isn't merely good for you, it's just plain good, morally good. Telling the truth is good from the point of view of the universe, he says. Of course, if there might be some exceptions to that. He talks about Nazis at the door or soldiers in Jericho at the door. Right?
The little classic. Does this make me look fat? You find your moral center in that question, probably more so than maybe even the Nazis.
Telling the truth isn't good merely because it increases your well-being or even the well-being of others. It can also be good even when it harms you. You should tell the truth even if it hurts. That's his. So he's making the point there. Truth telling is good in and of itself, right? It's not just because it's good for you. That would be a prudential value. No, it's good in and of itself, and that's we consider a moral value, right? So again, this distinction he's trying to draw to make sure that we're clear on what's going on here.
And scientists need to have this distinction too, because it might be beneficial for me to lie on a scientific paper that gets me to the Nobel and I get $1 million and the accolades and everything like that. But it's wrong for me to fudge my numbers because that's the whole point of what the peer-reviewedness is. And probably if you're going to the Nobel, someone's going to check your work over,
multiple times.
Yeah,
multiple people.
Over maybe the lesser social sciences that always seem to squeak by with, whatever fad theory at the time is trying to be snuck in there as objective science. So, we should want to tell the truth. And is it more than just it's good for me because then you have competing values. I can get immediate pleasure now from doing it and getting away with it, and if it's found that I fudged numbers later, well then I'll just come up with a better lie or say, oh no I misplaced the 1 for the 0. You're right. My apologies, and then I can get out of it that way. But I made my mark, so it's beneficial for me to lie at one point. But we don't really want to say that because there seems to be more to thou shalt not lie
than just what's in it for me. Yeah. And so now he says it's easy to conflate prudential values with moral values,
right? Because
prudential values do have a lot of characteristics that moral values do, and he lists several of them here. For instance, he says prudential values are objective. That is, that it's not determined by the subject's own judgment or well-being, right? We can know a prudential value independent of the person. So it's an objective type of thing, right? It's not dependent on the person. Brushing your teeth is good for us all, right? It's objectively good, right? So also prudential values are universal, right? They cut across all the people, right? All things are, all these values are common and universally applied to everyone, right? And he says prudential values are normative. There are reasons to pursue health. For example, there are reasons you ought to seek it, right? Brushing your teeth can give you a winning smile. So they are objective, they're independent of us, right? They're universal, even prudential values. They cut across, all of humanity is included in it, and they're normative. They give us reasons why we ought to act, which is similar to what moral values do. Right. We would say that at least moral realism says that their moral values are objective, they're universal, and they're normative.
We've done it. We found it.
All right. So, but clearly there's a difference between moral and prudential values is what he's trying to make. He says, despite the similarities between prudential and moral values, there are important differences. And now he's going to consider several differences here. He says, for one thing, even though prudential and moral values are objective, universal, and normal, prudential values appear to be conditional rather than absolute. In other words, they are if then type of things. They are based on conditions. If this, then that, right?
If I brush my teeth, then I will have a winning smile.
That's right. So that is the ought in the Prudential case, he says, you ought to brush your teeth, depends on your desires, right? You want a winning smile. So if I want a winning smile, then I ought to brush my teeth.
Right.
The ought there is prudential, right? It's based on a conditional phrase there, right? So he says this ought in the Prudential case depends on your desires. That is, if you wish to avoid unneeded trips to the dentist, so and so and so and so, right?
I think this is just Mick Stokes trying to get us to brush our teeth more.
That's right. That's right. But he says moral oughts don't seem to be conditional in this way. They seem to lack the if part, right?
Right.
And so you ought to love your neighbor no matter what. Not if anything.
Right.
Right? Regardless of what anyone thinks, regardless of your goals or your desires or your needs, you ought to love your neighbor. That's the right thing. That's the good thing to do. That's the morally right thing to do, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts, or whatevers, right? So there don't seem to be any of these things. So he says prudential goods also, so that's one thing, right? Prudential goods are seem to be things that are have the if then type of of way of saying them, right? They are conditional. They're conditional.
Right. So if you do this for lying, it's not if I want other people to tell me the truth, then I won't lie.
Yeah.
Well, no one cares.
Yeah,
no one cares, and no one knows.
Yeah. Right.
No one knows that you could want to be the most straight line truth telling person in the entire world, and there's nothing that causes other people to respond to you in similar fashion because of your actions, because of that. So
right. Yeah. So they're conditional. Moral truths are not conditional, right? Moral oughts are not conditional. They seem to lack the if part. Secondly, prudential goods seem to differ from moral goods in that moral value is others directed. So it's not about me with regard to moral value is what he says. So when we say we ought to brush our teeth, the reasons we typically give are those to benefit you, right? On the other hand, suppose we said that brushing your teeth is a form of loving your neighbor for obvious reasons.
Right.
This seems to elevate the prudential good of brushing your teeth into a moral one in that it is directed toward others and not myself. So number one, the conditionality of prudential goods are different than morality, because morality isn't conditional, is what he's suggesting. And number two, the self-directed versus other-directed notion. Prudential values seem to be self-directed. Morality seems to be directed toward others, right? So those are two, he suggests, important differences between morality and prudential values.
Right.
So he says, all of this is to say, as he quotes Murphy here, it does seem clear that we can distinguish conceptually between what is good for a person and what is just morally good, right? And so even if these often coincide in practice, but this distinction that Harris's view doesn't make. He says Harris has missed this particular distinction, right? In other words, he seems to be in danger of changing the subject and not giving us a theory of morality at all. Well-being alone seems to be a prudential good, something that is merely good for the subject experiencing it. Oops. So is it really morality, or is this just prudential good, right? Yeah. He says another way of saying the problem is that the concepts of morality and well-being can come apart. Because they're different, right?
Yeah, kind of think of it like a self-help book. Well, this would be helpful for me to how to win friends and influence people, but that's not to tell me how to treat them. Right. There might be factors of what benefits me in winning those friends or keeping those friends, but it doesn't tell me, why I shouldn't hurt people, other than a pure kind of that utilitarian point of view.
Yeah. And so he says, is it a moral reason or prudential reason? That's what he doesn't think Harris makes that distinction. In fact, he suggests that Harris is really talking about prudential reasons and not moral reasons, reasons that are good for the well-being of a person, as opposed to reasons that are good in and of themselves, which would make them morally good.
Right.